Yeah, I'm going to introduce the next speaker in English as well. And the next speaker is going to be um, Isabelle Barrьer, so a PhD, an associate professor at Malloy University, New York State, uh, and an adjunct member of doctoral faculty at City University of New York. So please welcome Isabelle Barrьer.
Hi, I just wanted to make sure that you could hear me before I start.
Yep, we can.
Okay, good. Okay. So first, I wanted to apologize for the fact that my slides are going to be mostly in English, although I've tried to make sure that many of the examples are in Russian. And this is not the fault of the organizers, it's my fault. Okay. Also, I welcome, I'm not sure how you want to run it, but if you prefer me to stop to make sure you have understood after each slide or couple of slides, that's fine with me. Okay, let me open my slides. So first I wanted to thank Irina for the invitation, and I'm talking to you. Also, I'm based in New York. I'm in Guadeloupe, where it's very hot. So excuse the fact that I'm bare shoulders, but it's very hot here. So I hope I can spread the sun to you from Guadeloupe, which is the Caribbean. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is what are the impact of the environment of the bilingual child and also of the properties of each language on bilingual development. And I was very honored and happy to be invited by Irina, by Dr. Sekarina to give this talk because I feel, I mean, the Russian-speaking population in New York is extremely interesting, but also extremely complex. And it's very much understudied. And what you will see is like something that is in progress, but with some results coming out. But I also wanted to kind of say that although my focus is going to be on Russian English bilinguals, I will say much about the fact that I will say a few things about the fact that actually in New York, many of the Russian-speaking children that we come across in our studies are not only exposed to Russian and English. And I feel the environment in which they are, it hasn't been like fully studied. Okay, but also I will try to kind of, in the course of this presentation, share with you a little bit about the education system in the US, in which, which gives us some kind of context in which to understand the bilingual development of the child, because that context is different from, I guess, current Russia. It's also different from the French context, etc. And you can't kind of guess, I mean, just guess it. Okay. So I'll talk about the significance of the presentation and the context of the study. I'll talk about some ecological consideration, and I'll present two studies, one on sound production and one on subject-verb dependencies. And then we'll come up to some conclusions and also some ideas for further research in New York or anywhere else. So in many parts of the world, including in the US, there is a fast increasing number of children who are labeled dual language learners, which is a very vague label, which just means that there is a language other than the dominant language of the education system in the home. Okay. And New York is has a special relationship with Russian because Russian is not found in, it's not found in high numbers in many different cities in the United States, but it is in New York. It's a third language with respect to the number of speakers of languages other than English. And another characteristic that is interesting is that half the speakers are recent immigrants, okay? And what I wanted to mention about these recent immigrants, in addition to studying the children, I'm lucky enough to kind of have been invited by different Russian-speaking parents group from different organizations. And this new generation of Russian-speaking parents is very interested in that their children, sorry. Okay, sure, I can make it a slideshow. Yeah, sorry. They are very interested in that their children may, develop their Russian, not their English. And I think compared to the generation before, but I haven't studied it formally, it's my understanding from what I hear at the parents' workshop, they are aware that if they don't make an effort to maintain Russian or to help the child develop it through Russian-speaking camps, Russian-speaking weekends that some organizations organize in the countryside in New York, or teaching the children how to read and write at some point, maybe the Russian is not going to just develop by itself. And I think this is a new awareness in the Russian-speaking community. So the other relevant aspect, of the study is that we need to understand better, like, what is a typical development inventory for multilingual children, if we want to also, for educators, and also if we want to kind of understand, like, when it's not, it's not developing typically and children need services. Okay. And what happens with these children labeled dual language learners is that they tend to be underdiagnosed for language disorder or speech disorders in the early stages of development, and they tend to be overdiagnosed later. Okay, so there is something going on here, and it's partly due to the fact that we don't know all the factors that matter to their development. So I'm going to try to open a map that I like very much just to give you an idea of, I will stop sharing and reshare once I open it. I'm going to reshare to make sure you can see this map, and so you understand, like, okay, this is the south of Brooklyn, where not all, but many of my participants go to preschool. And I want you to appreciate the fact that, yes, you have Russian here, but you also have all kinds of languages of the former republics, okay, surrounding Russian here, as well as Hebrew at the north, etc. So here you have many preschools, so schools for children from 3 to 5. You have many Russian-speaking or schools that claim to be Russian-speaking, and I'll go back to that. What this actually means, because maybe it doesn't mean what you think it means. So here we have many speakers of Russians, and also many, so sorry, I should have mentioned, this is a map that you will not find just if you look at the US Census. This is a map produced by the Endangered Language Alliance, which I like because it's much more detailed. They kind of collected additional data. And it shows you the amazing kind of diversity of New York with respect to both like the different languages as well as the different varieties of the same languages, etc. So what I wanted to mention is that so many of the children who are, I'm going to talk about this, many of the children who go to Russian-speaking preschool, they have Russian as a home language, but they also may have other languages like Belarusian or Ukrainian, etc. And we'll talk about this. Among the communities from the former republics that have their own kind of language preschools, preschools labeled with their language, the most important group are the Georgians. The others, like the Kyrgyz or the Uzbek or whatever, they tend to go, in my experience, they send their children to Russian-speaking preschools. Okay, that's at least what they're doing in New York. Okay, most of them. So the research, so sorry, I just need to reshare to make sure that, oops. So if you, sorry, when I'm in full slide mode, I can't see the chat. So, or raised hand. So if anyone, if you want to tell me when somebody has a raised hand and the question, I'm happy to stop. Okay. So the research context of this project, it's a project that investigates the language development of monolingual and multilingual children acquiring different varieties of English as well as different languages, as well as children with typical and atypical hearing. So I showed you a little bit, I showed you this map with where many Russian speakers are located in New York and where most of the preschools where we collect data are found. I just also wanted to mention that with respect to the preschool system, it may be a little different from what you find in Russia, is that also there is this new universal pre-K in New York, which is that all children qualify for preschool, all children below a certain age qualify for preschool services. This was not the case many years ago. So the only subsidized preschool systems that existed before, one of the main preschool systems that existed were only targeted children from low socioeconomic groups. So that was the Head Start program. And then with universal pre-K, what has happened is that it's not a centralized system of preschool education, but it's community-based organizations that apply to receive funding from the city, from the state, and so they can they are able to maintain the home language of the children if they so wish, or develop that language rather, as long as they kind of also make sure that children are introduced to English. Another characteristic of New York, which not many people kind of know, but actually, if you have a certain amount of children in a single school district that share a home language, you can go to New York Board of Ed and you can request a preschool and then a school that's going to be dual language for that program. And so, for instance, in Manhattan, not so much. I mean, so in Brooklyn, there are many preschools, Russian-speaking preschools that existed before universal pre-K a few years ago, and they, some of them applied for getting funding, or so that the children can, the parents don't have to pay; they just give vouchers to the school. Others, like the parents of Russian-speaking Colombian professors at Columbia, have advocated so that now there is public schools that's a Russian dual language program in New York. Okay, so New York kind of facilitates, if you know how to advocate, New York facilitates the opening of the preschool and schools. So it looks good on paper. One of the challenges is to find qualified teachers. So for preschool, yeah.
I'm sorry, dear Isabel. share your slides, you can see them. And it's
you can't see my slides? Sorry. Something happened. Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. I thought that you could see them. So, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Now you can see them and you want me to make them bigger, right?
Full screen mode, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So so what I wanted to tell you about this study, so we are going to kind of the children who participated in our study, they are both from low and middle socioeconomic status. We collected data in one preschool in Manhattan, not the one near Columbia, one in lower Manhattan. Most of the other preschool are low SES, low socioeconomic status. Most children were exposed to both Russian and another language at home, and that is because, so I will tell you a factor of exclusion later. So the languages that we find in those children, in addition to Russian, can be Ukrainian, Azerbaijani, Hebrew, Kyrgyz, etc. And as well as Italian, or so most of these languages, what they have in, I mean, they are very different from one another. I mean, so some of them are very close to Russian, I mean, or relatively close to Russian, like Ukrainian. Others are from different language family, like Azerbaijani, Hebrew, Italian. But at least with respect to the two features that I'm going to talk about, all these languages have different phonological systems, you know, compared to English, including the vowel system, which is what I'm going to start with, as well as they are more, I mean, just like they are more contrastive in their morphologies than English, okay? So so you're thinking, well, they include all these languages, so who do they exclude? So first of all, we exclude children who didn't pass hearing screenings. Children are systematically screened for whether they can hear well. Also, other developmental screenings at the beginning of the year, or children who are receiving special education services. And I repeat later that when we tested the children in Russian for one of the, for the studies, if the children didn't produce any Russian on the production task, if they consistently produced either, say, Ukrainian or Azerbaijani, or didn't kind of contrast, I mean, so we had some children who produced something called surgic, which I believe, I don't know if everybody knows what, I think probably most people know what surgic is. Irina, or do you have to explain? No, everybody knows. Okay, sorry, I can't see you very well. So, yeah, so we have this, there are these Russian there are these preschools that claim to be Russian speaking, but where actually we don't find many Russian speaking children, and also it's not clear based on what we hear from the teachers that are actually exposed to Russian or to other languages of the former republic. Okay, so in that case, if the child didn't speak Russian and in the production task, then they were excluded from the study. It's not like they're excluded. We keep this data on the side, but we didn't include them in the analysis of vowels and agreements that I will mention later. But if the children speak other languages, but also show that they could speak Russian in the production task, then they remain in our study. And if we didn't do that, we would have actually very few children. And we'll see, we have very few children because we need to test a lot of children in the Russian-speaking community to make sure that we have children who are actually exposed to Russian. So it's kind of interesting, but also makes things complicated. So with respect to the language, the two aspects of language and the languages that we are going to look at, this study I've divided into two studies. So one is on the production of vowel, which is a pilot study that's conducted on the data we collected for, we collected from the comprehension study that has more children, but I still think that it's interesting to look at both studies because they tell us different things about the importance of the language of the home, the characteristic of the language of the home, and of exposure, amount of exposure to English. So these are the most, the kind of research questions of these two studies are, what's the role of the exposure to English on the one hand, and also of the characteristics of the home language on language development, including on the acquisition of both, the first language as well as the home language, as well as English. So here, the study one, the focus is on lax vowels in General American English. So what this table shows is that General American English, which is the term I'm giving to a variety of English that is spoken by many people, and Russians, they overlap a lot in their tense vowel inventory. Like most of them are shared except this one. Okay. On the other hand, the status of lax vowels is kind of different across the languages. So these have a phonemic status. In English, there are main phonemes. They can, if you replace one by another or one by one of these, you get a contrast in meaning. Whereas it's my understanding, it's our understanding with my colleagues who conducted this study who collaborated on the study, that in Russian, these they are limited in where they occur, and they only occur in unstressed position. So for this study, we extracted data from 5 Russian English bilinguals whose main home language was Russian, and they were between 3 and 5. They were from low and middle socioeconomic status. And we looked at their production of connected speech and isolated words. So this was a posteriori analysis. This data collection didn't have as a goal to kind of focus on the analysis of their phonology, but for different reasons, we thought it would be interesting to look at when there are this type of vowels that are produced, that where this is the main allophones in both Russian and English, whereas these occur but in unstressed position and in like not as the main allophone, in Russian. We thought it would be interesting to look at whether children produce them in a way that's in a way that really like is distinctive. Okay. And because when you're looking at these vowels and the distinction is subtle, and if you rely on your transcription skills, your transcription is going to be filtered through your, your auditory system. So that's, you're not going to see clearly what happened. It's much better to do an acoustic analysis, okay? And I'm going to kind of show you the results of that. So for each vowel, we had 5 different words for each type of vowels, and we had both connected speech and isolated words, okay, in production. And here, if you look at the different measure of on the acoustic analysis, where F2 is a measure of how back the vowel is, to be very simple about acoustic analysis. What you see is that for most children, there is this clear distinction between the E and the E, these vowels, which are kind of a little bit difficult to distinguish. And the A, but for like for this child here, it's not very clear. Okay. The same thing happens with respect to F1, which is a measure of vowel height. So I just wanted to mention, just to make clear that people understand. So this is like the differences in F2 for the production of the 3 vowels. And each line represents an individual child, okay? Because it's such a small group, like giving group results would probably be misleading and would kind of blur the fact that with some children we have a distinction, whereas with others the two are very close, okay? So you can see, for instance, for these 2 children here, there is not much difference between these 2 vowels based on F1, okay, their vowel heights, okay? Whereas the other children make that distinction. And you can also see that for this child, there is not much difference between this vowel and this vowel and this vowel and this vowel, which means like the 3 vowels probably sound very similar, okay? Or objectively, based on the F1 and F2, they don't sound different, okay? This is interesting. We actually compared, and I'm going to bring that comparison because we have what we're trying to do with Russian, we've already done with Spanish, where Spanish is different from Russian because it doesn't have these vowels at all. It's not just that they have a different status in the phonemic repertory. They have a completely different, they do not occur in Spanish. And here, what we have is that we have contrast depending on how much English how fluent in English the child is on some independent measure, it takes more time for the children on the whole to make the distinction, and there are fewer children who make clearer distinction compared to our very small Russian cohort. So we still need to be cautious with that. But so what we find, if we want to kind of draw some conclusions from this very, first pilot study, is that the English vowel system is more contrasting than the vowel Russian system with respect to these like vowels. Then the English vowel system is more contrasting than Russian and Spanish. Russian is closer to English. The vowels exist, these vowels exist, but they have a different status. So it may explain clearer distinction of English-like vowel production in bilinguals. However, we saw that there was much individual variation, and that individual variation may be tied to the fact that the children are exposed to different percentages of English. Any questions? So I know this is a small pilot study, but we're looking at production. And why is this too? I mean, if people are also more interested in why is this set of vowels? So hang on, I think I'm just going to why is this interest in these vowels? We'll talk a little bit about this at the end. Well, it's the fact that, for instance, when children are taught how to read and write in English, they are taught to pay attention to the distinction between the A and the E, because, they have they tend to be spelled differently. But, you want to make sure that children actually distinguish them both in their perception and their production, because before you can use that in order to teach them how to spell. Okay, the second study is on comprehension, and that's because there are a lot of studies on expressive skills in bilinguals, but much fewer on comprehension. And knowing a language and developing a language, it involves both the understanding and producing this language. So we are interested in subject-verb agreements that in English doesn't have many contrasts. So it's, many forms in the habitual present, many forms for English, for I, for you, etc. is the verb will remain without having a change at the end of the verb. Whereas, in the third person singular for mainstream American English, you have this change that occur with the third person singular. So here you have like 2 cues to who is doing what to whom, to the fact that it's only one person doing the playing of the soccer. You have the fact that either pronominal forms that indicate singular, or a noun phrase or determiner phrase, whatever you want to call it, with without a plural marker, so singular, and you have the third person singular at the end of the verb. In contrast, here you have the plural marker either in the pronominal form or in the plural of the noun phrase. That's going to have an effect on the verbs that will not take the third person singular. It's going to be a different form of the verb. So why being interested in this particular, what's called this syntactic dependency? Well, it's because it's one of the milestones in the acquisition of morphosyntax, and it seems to be achieved at different ages across languages, and with a lot of variation between 2.5 and 5 years of age. And why being interested in this in bilingual English Russian speaking children? Well, I don't need to show you a Russian verb paradigm, and it would take a very big slide or a very small font to kind of show you this. You know very well that there are much more contrastive form of the verbs in Russian than there are in English, where there is variation for person, etc., and numbers much more systematically across different persons and across different tenses. So it's a much more contrastive system than English. So we tested more than 16 bilingual Russian English-speaking children, but we had a few criteria, as I mentioned before. So they attend a Russian dual language program, or their declared home languages is home language includes Russian. Like when they're in the Head Start program is not a dual language program, but it has a dual language policy, so that the children, the parents of the children kind of declare, enter the language the children speak at home, and the children that we excluded are those children who spoke other languages in the production task when they were being tested in Russian by mostly Russian-speaking research assistants who spent the first 16 years of their life in a Russian-speaking country. Okay, and we train research assistants not to switch to other languages, etc. Okay, and it's not clear based on, when we listen to the recording of these children speaking something different than Russian, it's not clear that in the background the teachers themselves speak Russian. So I could have a lot to say about this, but just for the sake of time, so it's not because we included children who speak other languages in the home environment that we didn't pay attention to actually what the children can speak. Okay. Sorry, oh my God, oh my goodness, I forgot to put the stimuli in Russian, and just give me I don't understand this, sorry. Okay, I'm going to explain the task to you, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the stimuli that I should have had here. But anyway, I'll tell you through this slide. So the procedure for this task is children first see a video on one side and then another side, and in all the videos there are two boys. And in the contrast between the video, there are two boys because we're not interested in whether children understand the singular or the plural of nouns. We're interested in they understand who is doing what, okay? Whether they can assess whether the subject here is singular or plural, okay? And that's going to be depend on both the ending of the noun used in the subject as well as the ending of the verb. So in Russian, you systematically have at least two cues. Okay. And as far as I understand, and you can correct me because I'm not the Russian speaker, you are the Russian expert, okay? So the children are presented with two videos that they see in silence, one after the other, and the sides are counterbalanced. And then they hear the sentence, they hear a sentence that, and then they have to say to which video the sentence corresponds, okay, to which video it matches, okay. And of course, with that particular example, the children, you know, the appropriate video is the matching one would be the one on the right. Okay. With respect to the condition, so we matched the fact that the tasks were given in both English and Russian, and of course English doesn't work the same way as Russian. It doesn't have this kind of markers here. However, it does, you know, which kind of fuses case as well as number. But in English, you can have a number marker here as well as here. It's either silent or it's overt. With respect to subject-verb agreement. So we match the English stimuli on the number of cues, okay? So it's not, it doesn't work exactly the same, but still. And there are a lot of different conditions in English that I'm going to tell you when I show the results. With respect to Russian, we had two different conditions. We had the condition like this, where it was, so it was a singular or plural noun as a subject, followed by a verb, and then followed by either a noun, an actual noun, or a nonce noun. Okay, so with the nonce nouns, like invented nouns, the object is not the same across the two pictures, but because it's a novel noun, the children can't use that to kind of guide their choice. Okay, and we do this because this is like a little harder, and in other languages on which we work, we have tested like both conditions. Okay. So if we look at the result, and there are different ways to compute this result, I'm showing you like the ones that we feel is the most reliable because it kind of eliminates any kind of bias that children may have towards the plural picture, where sometimes there is more going on in the plural picture. So this is like, so the chances for that experiment is 50 because you have a choice between two pictures, you know, so it's 0.5 here that's represented in red. And then what you see is that when the children are exposed to this kind of structure with the actual noun in the object position, you know, as an object, they actually perform, they show evidence of understanding in both the singular and plural condition, okay? However, when it's a nonce object, they do a better, when it's an object they don't recognize and a word that they don't recognize here in the object condition, they have issues with respect to, they don't show that much evidence of comprehension in the singular condition. Okay, for Russian, so with respect to the results for English of these Russian-speaking children, what we see is that they perform, so in English, we have many different conditions. So we have, because we are matching the conditions that we do on different languages, but not all of them are exactly comparable to the Russian condition. So this one is the closest condition that you know, these two like match the Russian conditions because the children are given two cues as well, like they're given you know, the singular or plural of the noun here. They have verbs that start with something else, and so in English it would be boys, for instance, the boys. It could be read, the books. So here it's not a verb that starts with the plosive, so it doesn't mask you know, you can hear whether the noun is plural or singular, and then you have the ending, either the boys read or the boy reads. Okay. So these conditions match the Russian condition, and you can see that in the same way as they did better with the real noun in the object position, so do they in English. Here, these Russian-speaking children are above chance. And then we have other conditions where the children here, the marker in intransitive construction, so something like the boys run versus the boy runs, the boy sleeps versus the boy sleep, where there is only one cue to the when there is only one cue to the to whether the construction is singular or plural, because you can't really because of the s of sleep, it's hard to hear whether whether it's the boys or the boys. So if you say the boys sleep or the boy sleeps, you really have to pay attention to the ending of the verb in English. And here you have where the same constructions like the boy skips, or the boy sleeps in the bed or whatever. So you have something else after the verb, and it seems that they are doing okay in this medial condition. And then they are not doing. Sorry, this is the adverbial condition. So this is like the boys. The boys sleep deeply. So here they do, versus the boy sleeps deeply, they do well in the singular, but not in the plural. And here they don't do well at all in the boy sleeps in the bed, okay? So they do well on, they do better on the constructions that has two cues and that doesn't involve a noun. Okay, and then with the condition where it's only one cue, then it gets a little bit more difficult. Okay. So one aspect, so like when you look at these results, maybe there is nothing so surprising. The children are doing better in Russian than in English. Most of these children are dominant in Russian in their home environment, and they go to Russian-speaking preschools. Even the children in the Head Start program, where it's not a dual language program, most of them are in classes where Russian is a dominant language in the class for many children. So there is either a teacher or an assistant teacher who speaks Russian, so they get a fair amount of exposure. So the fact that they don't perform above chance on these two conditions in English may not be surprising. Okay. However, they do perform well on, most of them perform well on that condition. Okay. So what is surprising, what came out as a surprising result, but it's also a result that we can relate to other results on our other bilinguals. It's the fact that, if you expect, it's the fact that the children who perform the best are not those that hear the most English, okay? So here, when you look at these two groups, these children are exposed to English a lot in their home environment. So what happened is that they, according to the no, this should have been, oh my God, this should have been 90, sorry. According to the two questionnaires that we sent to the parents' home, these children here, although they hear Russian, they hear a lot of English at home. Okay. These children who hear very little English at home, and both of these children do not do very well with respect to understanding English, which is surprising. The children who are doing the best, who have the best performance with respect to their comprehension of these structures in English, are the children who are hearing English and Russian about 50% of the time. Okay, so to us, this seems to indicate that one of the possible interpretation of this is that the fact that they hear, relatively, a substantial amount of Russian, they are used to paying attention to the ending of words, including the ending of verbs, and they transfer this skill into English because, and these relatively abstract skills, given that the endings are not the same, okay? you don't have a third person singular S in Russian, you have these other kind of forms, and they vary depending on the verb paradigm, etc. Okay. So this result is surprising, but it's also like, although it's surprising, we find it very interesting, and it's compatible with what some people have said about one language bootstrapping the other. So the early work of people like Indra Sinka on Latvian and English, and Christina Cheleta on German and English, as well as more recent work by Blom that shows that if children come from a language where there are certain morphological markers at the end of verbs, it's going to be easier for them to kind of acquire this in English. But most of these studies were conducted on production, not on comprehension. They are also compatible with our Spanish results. So our Spanish results, we were able to run regression analysis and correlations because we have more participants, but we hope we are going to get there for Russian. So with our Spanish-speaking participants, we have, again, better, just like for our Russian-speaking participants, they have better result on their home language than on English, which is not surprising. But what is interesting is that they show very high correlation between their Spanish result and their English results. And I just want to remind you that in case you know a little bit of Spanish, that the singular plural of verbs in Spanish it's not like nouns. Like if you want to pluralize a noun in Spanish, you also add z, like os, like niño, niños, which you think, okay, well, that's not different from the plural marker in English, but for the verb, it's completely different. So you have things like contact, contan, where you have in English sing and sings, okay? So sings and sings, sorry. So it's, again, not a similar phonological feature to mark the agreement across the languages. However, it seems that the children are, the fact that the fact that they perform still lower in English and in Spanish, again, is not surprising because most of our Spanish-speaking children hear much more Spanish than English. But at the same time, the fact that they perform, their performance in Spanish kind of drives their performance in English is similar a little bit to what we find here. We are not able to run the same kind of statistical analysis because we only have 16 children here. We hope that when we've tested more, we can conduct the same kind of analysis. So to conclude, the results on our the comprehension construction so these constructions in English, third person singular in English is a construction with very low frequency, okay? And it exhibits much more contrast in Russian than in English, or in Spanish for that matter, or in Azerbaijani, or in Kyrgyz, or etc. And it seems that the comprehension in Russian facilitates the comprehension in English. And it's our result on Russian are in line with what we found for English, for our Spanish-English bilingual. So there is possible evidence of transfer in comprehension. Okay, transfer has been talked about a lot in production, but not so much in comprehension. Okay. And the bigger conclusion is that, the longer conclusion is that there are many factors that impact language acquisition in dual language learners. For aspects of language that are more contrastive in the home language, like subject-verb agreement in Russian than in the majority language, it seems that we have evidence of transfer. For aspect of language in which the dominant language is more contrastive, like the vocalic system, there is also the importance of percentage of exposure to English. And with respect to the significance of this result, so in English, the clinical tests like the preschool language scales or the SELF, etc., that enables the diagnosis of children with language impairment, they tend to kind of, they feature the third person singular and plural subject verb agreement. But we feel that in the case of these bilinguals, the information that looking at the structure will give you is more like insights in English via their first language. It's not really insight in their, it may not be a direct insight into their, or if it's an insight into their ability to learn English, that's related to their first language. And the second conclusion has to do with, the importance of if there are vowel distinctions that are useful to teach how to read and that are useful to kind of to spell for native English-speaking children, you have to make sure that they're also distinguished in the bilinguals. And we saw that there was a lot of variation with respect to this distinction between vowels that could be tied to the amount of input. And to finish, I would like to thank the participants, their parents, and the preschools that welcomed us. I also want to say that, Katia Rodnik, who is currently a PhD student working with some of the production data and other sources of data for a PhD on distinguishing language impairment from typically developing bilingual English-Russian children, has been instrumental to this study, as well as Sarah Kress and Daniela Shimunov, who was a fellow on an NSF programs that I run. And there are many Russian assistants who have contributed to this study, as well as long-term collaborators, Thierry Nazi and Geraldine Legendre for the agreement part, and Valerie Schaefer and Susan Van de Vries for the part on vowels. And I'm very thankful to NSF for funding these studies. Stop sharing. And I'm happy to take any questions. And you can try in Russian. I never told that to Irina, but I studied Russian many years ago, so I have remnants of comprehension, but not, I probably will need the translation. But
Great, thank you very much for the talk. Those were really interesting investigations, and really, if there was anyone who's got a question, we've got time for one or two. So is anybody willing? Oh yeah, so here we have one.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It's very interesting. I have a question about the methodology of the second study. That you've used Russian dual language program children and the Head Start program children. And what's the difference between those two groups of children in terms of exposure to both the languages? Because from what I see, the dual language program children, they don't necessarily speak Russian at home, or is that like
yeah, so it's true that you're right that in a classic, I should have been more explicit about this. And so it is true that in the US, when you talk about a typical dual language program, you have people who come from, who you may have half the children who are monolingual in one language and the other have monolingual in the other language, and you put them together. But that's not what's going on in those programs. Almost all of these children, so we're talking preschools, so all of these children have Russian at home. What you're saying is true of, like, for instance, the bilingual Spanish and French program in Brooklyn, the dual language French and Spanish program in Brooklyn, they recruit only half of them have to be French speakers in the classroom and half of them have to be English speakers. And they are like what I would call like classic dual language programs. And you have some of these programs in Manhattan for Mandarin speaking children. My experience of the dual language speaking, Russian dual language speaking children is not that, is that there is some Russian at home. Okay. I don't know, it could be that, so Columbia just, that new program, it could be that it will end up functioning like this because that's run by the public school system, but we didn't go there yet, partly because when when you have programs run by public schools, there is a second IRB you have to apply for. I think it would have been a very interesting school to go to, but it would have taken us longer to get IRB. And it just, that school opened towards the end of the time when we collected data. So, so you're right. I mean, I should have said, these are not, I mean, they call themselves dual language program, but they are not the classic US dual language programs.
Okay,
And so the Head Start program is different. The Head Start is, so in the Head Start program, so the program who calls themselves dual language programs, in the preschools that call themselves like that, most of the teaching is in Russian for everything. And they say they have to do by obligation to get UPK funding. They claim that they do English. One day I'll make Irina listen to the English classes and she'll tell me what it is, because I'm not, you know, like, so the amount of English exposure can be very limited. It depends on the program. So some of the, most of the programs in Brooklyn, there is not that much of a concerted effort to kind of, I mean, there is not, the teachers who are teaching English are much more comfortable in Russian than in English, okay? There is just a program in Manhattan where they really have a more like a dual language thing, in the sense that there are some native Russian-speaking teachers who kind of teach, you know, like teach in Russian, and you have some, you know, native or at least fluent English-speaking person who teaches in English, and they're much more consistent and I don't know how to say, intentional about the way they spread the time between the two languages, okay? Then the Head Start program is a different ball of game altogether. So in Head Start, if you have to have some kind of dual language policy that specifies how many hours the children, you know, how much time the hours spent on each language. And if you have, so Head Start classes are around 18 children. If there are at least 9 children in the class who speak the same home language, you have to have either an assistant teacher or a teacher who speaks that language. So in the Head Start where we are, it's like, it's not where the students were recruited. So there was either a Russian teacher or a Russian speaking assistant teacher, and it's like at the beginning of the year, there's a lot of Russian, and slowly it moves to English. Okay. So that's, and the Head Start is also where we had a lot of Hebrew, because many of these Russian-speaking children, their parents immigrated from Israel. So that's another dimension.
I see.
But one of the important home languages is Russian. Yeah.
And so from what I understand, there's no kind of really strict control in sense that, you know, how many hours you spend speaking English and how many hours you spend speaking Russian in school, in these programs. So from
well, there is on paper, there is not that much in reality. There is a lot of variation. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, it's okay.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid we have no more time for questions, but Dr. Barrьер, we would really like to thank you one more time. We do really greatly appreciate your participation in the school, and yeah, thank you so much.